Hello and welcome back, and today I want to talk about two of the most popular new releases being covered right now from Synology and QNAP. If you've been looking at buying a brand new NAS device either as your first entry into the world of network attached storage or because you want to upgrade an existing system that's looking a little bit dated, chances are for a 2-bay you have been looking at these two NASes. This is the DS720 Plus from Synology and the TS-253D from QNAP. These two really do represent the very best 2-bay NAS that either company have ever released. And even though we have seen a slight slowdown in the release of hardware thanks to world events and, more pressing concerns, let's be honest, chances are that both of these two devices, as a 2-bay buyer, are very much going to be up your strata. So, let's talk about their design, let's talk about their hardware, let's talk about their software, and ultimately talk about which one is best for you. Before we go any further though, it's worth highlighting that both of these two NASes represent some of the very best that both companies have to offer. They both arrive with support of surveillance applications in Surveillance Station and QVR Pro. They both have photo recognition applications in Synology Moment and QMaggie. They both arrive with a myriad of multimedia applications in Photo Station, Video Station, Music Station, and more. They both arrive with a multi-tiered backup application, which allow you to back up from NAS to NAS, folder to folder, client device to NAS, cloud to NAS, and back and forth either way, with Hyper Backup and Hybrid Backup Sync 3, as well as interacting with G Suite and Office 365 on both platforms, being able to migrate data back and forth between those platforms on either device. Both NAS providers arrive with support of PC and Mac systems, as well as having loads of applications that can be installed locally on your desktop PC or Mac, or your mobile Android or iOS device. And both of them arrive with great hardware inside of a very modern level for NAS buyers. Now, don't get me wrong, this isn't top tier stuff. There's none of your i3s and 10 GBE here. That's when you have to go enterprise. But for a home or SMB user, these two are very much going to be the best out there. And because they both support the very latest SATA hard drives, which currently the biggest you can get are Seagate's own Ironwolf series at 16 terabytes per NAS hard drive. Both of them support up to 32 terabytes of raw data. So loads to do there. And remember, they both support RAID levels with RAID 0, RAID 1 and JBOD, with the Synology also supporting its own SHR system. And both of them arrive with support of snapshots and whole system backups, volume backups, folder backups, and more. They both arrive with support of ext4, but the Synology arrives with support of ext4 and BTRFS, which has kind of faster background snapshots, less resource intensive, as well as quicker shared folder duplication. It's not perfect, and I know we've done comparisons in the past, so we're not going to go on that too much there, but if you are interested in BTRFS, this very well might be the NAS for you. But let's talk about these two in terms of design. They're both kind of real staples of what both companies have been putting out there right now, with the Synology 720 Plus arriving in a familiar chassis that's been slightly modified for this newer iteration. We'll talk about why in a little bit more detail later. It's a 2-bay chassis with both drive trays being lockable. They both arrive with click and load trays, so toolless, so you can put 3.5-inch hard drives inside very, very easily, although you will need to use a screwdriver for 2.5-inch drives. It also arrives with two 1 GBE ports on the rear, so up to 200 or so megabytes per second transmission, and again, that's used in either link aggregation or load balancing, depending on your own setup and your own network switch and routers and stuff like that in the background. It also arrives with USB 3 ports on the front and back, and can also be expanded with the DX517 upgrade thanks to a new SATA port, meaning that you can expand beyond these 2 bays to a total of 7 bays of storage. In terms of aesthetic design, it is a very nice looking NAS. It's kind of very similar to what we've seen. It's very compact. It's got that Synology logo on the sides that's well ventilated, and ultimately it is a very, very good example of Synology's own chassis being used in this new device. Now, The 253D utilises a very familiar chassis. It utilises a very similar chassis to its predecessor, the 253B. It has got two click and load trays there based on the front. Again, toolless unless you're going to use 2.5-inch drive media. And although the base can't be locked, it has got a front panel there that can be locked that protects the two drives from immediate interference. It's not quite as protective as the key lock design of the 720 Plus, but the 253D still gives you a great compact chassis there with ventilation on the sides, the base and the top, and the front being ventilated at a slight angle as well. It doesn't have the kind of Synology logo kind of mesh ventilated thing, which is quite a cool design, but it's still got plenty of ventilation. On the rear of the device you've got two 2.5 GBE LAN ports that we'll talk about in a lot more detail later on. Lots of other hardware ports as well as a single rear fan on both of them, in fact. Now, the design of the QNAP is kind of they're both plastic on the outside, but the QNAP one is soft, kind of curved edges, and is a little bit deeper than the Synology, but it is kind of smaller overall when you're looking at it. The Synology is a lot more hard-edged, and although it has got slight curves on those edges, it's a little bit more, dare I say it, military in design compared of the two of them. And as a Mac user, I kind of would have thought that Synology would have gone for the more curvy design that we're seeing on that 253D. Now, the 253D is black overall in pretty much all the colours, with the Synology being completely black as well, with the Synology being matte black plastic all the way around, and the QNAP utilising kind of slight gloss and matte textures in different areas. In terms of design, it really is up to you which one you think looks better. Me personally, I'm kind of drawn to the 720 Plus design overall. The QNAP one, I like the design, but I think it's a bit odd. Kind of, I know it's definitely more appeasable to a lot of people that like a discrete NAS, but overall for me, the Synology is better in terms of design overall. And that idea of design can also be extended over to the software as well, with QTS on the QNAP platform and DSM on the Synology platform. DSM is designed to be a lot more user-friendly and a lot more flush, colourful graphics, and it's a little bit more responsive, and it's certainly a little bit more user-friendly, but it does hide a lot of the key information that a number of you might want to use to create a more bespoke hardware setup in the background, and you do have to dig quite a bit to get to the technical information. I mean, again, when you go just into the control panel alone, when you look at it, it appears quite basic, and that's because they've created a hierarchy of options where you have to dig quite deep. You can use the search bar, of course, but you'd have to dig quite a few layers to get towards the more technical aspects, whereas the QNAP arrives, it's not quite as user-friendly. It's still very, very close indeed, and it's a far more informative interface. Certainly, it's not like DOS or something where it's horrible text everywhere, and it is very, very graphical, but non-technical people may be a pinch more intimidated by the QNAP user software. You can check out live demos of both of their software to see what I mean, but if you are a Mac user, you might vibe more with the Synology DSM platform, but you will find it a little bit limiting in places. The QNAP platform is far, far more desirable to Windows and Android users, and still appealable to Mac users, don't get me wrong, but it will appear a little bit more intimidating from the bat. Even the control panel on the QNAP compared with the Synology does have a lot more information being thrown at you, which can be a good thing or a bad thing depending on the user. But really, in terms of design, it's really up to you. I can only tell you what's good and bad about both. Me, I'm drawn to the physical design of the Synology, but the software design of the QNAP. I really like QTS. I think it gives the right balance of information if you want it and it's there. But that's up to you. In terms of hardware, these are two very interesting NASes, because over the years we've all kind of got a little bit bored, I would say, in terms of each of the generation of NASes. This idea that the brands only give so much of an increase each year, because as much as they want to improve on the predecessor to show that they're developing and moving forward, they don't want to go too much, because otherwise it will raise the price significantly, or it treads on the toes of bigger, better lines above it. So it has to find a place within the family tree. However, both the 720 Plus and the 253D have made significant increases in physical attributes and specifications over their predecessors, probably the most we've ever seen between generations. Now, the Synology has probably the biggest leap in one area most of all, and I'll get to it in a second. For a start, it arrives with a lot of the things of its predecessor. As mentioned, it supports those hard drives, those big Seagate Iron Wolf hard drives in those bays there. It's got 2 LAN ports there built into the rear of the device, so up to just over 200 megabytes per second with link aggregation, bear in mind. On top of that, USB 3 ports for external devices, external storage, some supported Wi-Fi dongles. I know that's being slowly phased out. And of course that eSATA port for expandability. But it also arrives with 2 NVMe SSD bays built in, which from Synology is an incredible move. You've got 2 hard drive NAS. So in theory, even if you use enterprise grade hard drives, which will give you about 260 megabytes per second performance, even combining them, you're still going to hit a bottleneck. You're only going to get really about 400 meg or so, maybe 500 in an ideal scenario, and of course that will be exceeded with utilization of SSDs. But they've included 2 additional bays of NVMe SSD storage. That means that the hard drives can take advantage of the caching performance of those SSDs and get much greater internal performance possible. You are bottlenecked by the 2 1GBE ports, there's no denying that, but including 2 NVMe bays to what with 2 hard drive bays will result in great performance. Some might see it as a bit of waste because 2 hard drives will already create a kind of glass ceiling anyway in terms of overall performance, but I think there's lots of ways around that, and with the promised improvements in DSM7 in their SSD caching algorithm, you are going to see great results there. However, you can only use those SSD bays for caching. You can't utilize them for raw storage, which again, if you've got 1 or 2 GBE connectivity, you couldn't see that full potential anyway, but it would have been great to have a portion of NVMe SSD storage inside your Synology NAS to be used by things like Plex and virtual machines, maybe even surveillance with high-def cameras, which are really going to be pushing a huge amount of data. So it's a real shame that we can only use those for caching. Still, nevertheless, it's great to see those NVMe bays present on a 2-bay NAS, particularly from Synology, a company that generally are a little bit cautious about their hardware investment and are a lot more focused on their software investment. Now, the CPU and memory inside it utilizes the J4125 processor. That is a 2.0 GHz CPU that can be burst up to 2.7 GHz, and that's 4 cores. It also arrives with 2 gig of DDR4 memory that can be upgraded to 6 gig, weirdly. Not a fan of that, but those attributes do make this 2-bay still the most powerful 2-bay that Synology have ever brought to the table. And it's great to see this device showing that Synology are prepared to push the envelope in terms of hardware. Now, the QNAP utilizes the exact same CPU and the same memory, but it arrives with the same same CPU, but 4 gig of DDR4 memory that can be upgraded to 8 gig. So more memory on day one and a higher overall supported capacity limit, which is a bit odd given they've got the same CPU, but we'll leave that debate for another video. On top of that, that CPU on both devices means that they both perform the same kind of read and write speeds, but of course the types of files you use and how you use them within their own respective software will make a lot of difference. But in other areas of hardware, we see enormous innovations on the 253D. For a start, we have 2 2.5 GBE ports. So instead of 1 GBE, each port can transmit 2.5 times that of 1 GBE, up to, with link aggregation, a potential 5 GBE connectivity between you and the NAS if you have a supported switch, or you're utilizing a 2.5, 5 GBE or 10 GBE copper base T port. And you can do that directly if you so choose, or via supported network switch. On top of that, the device also arrives with Hdmi output, and that's Hdmi 60 frames per second 4K with its own dedicated user interface, which runs parallel to QTS on the NAS. So it can be all the different user interfaces and apps can be accessed by multiple users all at the same time. that HDMI output can be used for surveillance, and thanks to that 4K 60 frames per second, you can have more cameras showing in the QVR Pro surveillance array. We'll talk about the software later. On top of that, that HDMI port supports Plex. It supports lots of first-party applications from QNAP and third-party tools as well. With a huge community out there producing and repurposing Android apps and Windows apps into the QNAP platform, which is real cool, and there's lots of experimentation there. Also, in terms of hardware, the device has got more USB ports, and these USB ports can support external storage, sure, but they can also be used for keyboard, video. They can be used for keyboards, they can be used for mice, they can be used for joypads, they can be used for so many more things than you can on the QNAP, thanks to its use in conjunction with the HDMI port. And finally, the device arrives with a PCIe upgrade slot. That's a PCIe Gen 2 ×4 slot. That means you can add NVMe cache, you can add 10 GBE, more 2.5 GBE ports, or 5 GBE. You can add wireless cards. And again, I'm getting the impression QNAP are definitely going to be entering the Wi-Fi 6 market soon. So you can create a huge Wi-Fi 6 wireless network and turn the NAS into kind of a Wi-Fi 6 router for the rest of your devices. There's a lot of potential there. It doesn't arrive with those NVMe SSD bays as standard. That's something only the Synology has. But you can upgrade with an NVMe SSD card, either the official QM2 card series or even third-party cards are supported on this device. And there are even combo cards that allow you to add both NVMe SSD cache SSDs and a 10 GBE port on a single card onto this device, thereby giving you 10 GBE connectivity to the NAS and improvements on the internal operation speed of the SSDs utilized as cache to support those hard drives. But more than that, the QNAP allows you to use those NVMEs for raw storage too. You could have an area of 2 hard drives in a RAID 1 and 2 SSDs on a QM2 card in a RAID 0, RAID 1, whatever your poison, and then you can edit directly on those SSDs. Fast accessing on your PC or Mac system if you're a photo video editor, yum, and then those SSDs can be synced with the hard drives, or maybe utilizing these hard drives as archive storage. And remember, there are loads of different backup strategies currently available. So as much as I'm banging on about hardware, let's face it, there is more hardware and more ways to interact with your data on that QNAP. And despite the fact that the Synology on the software on the Synology is probably better overall in terms of fluidity and a number of the apps that we're going to talk about in a while, in terms of hardware, you gotta give it to this QNAP, because although they've got the same CPU and the Synology has got that NVMe SSD cache, you're just getting more for your money on that QNAP. Now, software is one area of a huge divergence between these two companies. I say divergence, they've changed a lot over the years. Synology used to be the brand that we went to for the software, not the hardware, and QNAP the brand you went to for the hardware, not the software. But things have leveled out significantly in 2020. For a start, Synology has better hardware on board, but their software range is as good as it's ever been. And, you know, their first-party apps are first class. They've got replacements for, WhatsApp and Skype in the form of Synology Chat. So all of your users can talk within this private network with an app for mobile phones as well as desktop too, and accessible via the web browser. They've got an alternative to Google Drive and Dropbox and stuff like that in the form of Synology Drive, a one-portal access point that can also synchronize with file streaming and file pinning on your local Mac or Windows system, which is pretty cool to have a folder on your local QNAP Finder or Windows File Explorer just there that's the NAS, and you can interact with it natively like you would any other folder on your PC or Mac. And replacements for load Synology Calendar, Synology Mail, Synology, there's just so many applications built into it to replace third-party apps that we all use. So Synology Office, there's another one replacing the likes of Google Docs and Office 365. There are loads of great replacement apps there. On top of that, you've got Active Backup Suite, an enterprise-grade, free, multi-user and whole system overview backup and synchronization tool. You can add Linux servers, VMs, other NASs. You can bash all of your devices into a single backup and synchronization portal. It is a great enterprise-grade software that other brands are charging you literally hundreds, if not thousands per year for, and they've rolled it in with the device. There's a slightly lower grade backup tool known as Hyper Backup, which is still very, very good, incredibly intuitive, user-friendly, but still not quite as good as the QNAP offering Hybrid Backup Sync 3, which I will talk about in a moment. But ultimately, Synology's software platform is designed to be as fluid and smooth as possible. It's the same with their surveillance platform, Surveillance Station 8.2. Currently, it arrives with a great support of many, many IP cameras, as well as a graphical user interface that's completely separate to DSM, but running parallel. So again, multi-user with all accessing at once. And when you do access it, you can access all of your cameras or via a control deck via the web browser. You're not just being pushed to a client app, which is what happens with QVR Pro on the QNAP. It is incredibly user-friendly, but you only get 2 camera licenses, which I know will put a number of you off. And carrying on the subject of Synology and the software, it's worth highlighting that they are the only NAS brand that has dedicated applications for Amazon Alexa on their Skill series, as well as Amazon Fire Stick. So that means Fire TV even. So it means if you want to interact with your audio, you want to ask Alexa to play certain songs on the NAS, Synology have an app for Alexa that allow you to do that, and they're the only brand that do that. Other brands like QNAP have to utilize things like My Media, which is another skill from a third party that allows you to bridge things, which is pretty cool. On top of that, if you want to watch your movies on your Amazon Fire TV, listen to your music, look at your photos, they've got their first party app there, and they're the only brand that do that. And if that is something of interest to you and you don't want to fiddle around too much, it's very much the one for you. That's what I mean about Synology. They are trying to keep it as simple as possible and hide the technical stuff in the background, often to help people, but some techie users may find this more of a hindrance. Definitely the more user-friendly of the 2 brands by a pinch, and if that sounds like something you're interested, that you want to buy and buy into, definitely consider the Synology. Now, the QNAP gives you a greater depth of what you can do. You can create a far more bespoke network environment, and when it comes to using third-party or even their own first-party software, you have a lot on offer. They have loads of first-party apps. There was a time a few years ago where they weren't really prioritizing the software as much as they do now, and 2-3 years later, there is so much to choose from. And their QMAGI photo recognition application, I think, is better than Synology's Moments apps, thanks to things like Multimedia Console, giving you a better way to index your all your data on the NAS and choose where you want the apps to go for. One area I didn't really touch on with Synology is that a lot of their applications will force you to have data in certain locations. There isn't a customizability to tell the NAS, all my data is in that folder, dig it from there. A lot of the time it will go, no, you have to put your data in this folder and this folder alone, which really hacks a lot of people off. QNAP will say, put it where you like, tell us where it is, we'll take care of it for you. And they do that a lot with their music, video, and photo applications, both locally via a web browser or on a client app for PC or Mac, or on a mobile app for Android or iOS. They allow you to either explore smart albums that have been automatically indexed, or allow you to browse manually. It's about choice with QNAP, and you're going to find that through and through. The ability to allow many different ways of doing things, but the Synology says you can only do things network or internet, but does them exceptionally well. So it's really a choice on that one. And carrying on with software, they have better, I think, business tools currently. Their virtualization platform, their virtualization station is greater, I believe, in terms of density and ability than Synology's Virtual Machine Manager. Synology's Virtual Machine software has caught up significantly, but it's not quite as good as QNAP's own app there. QNAP have got Virtualization Station, Linux Station, to within about 5 clicks and about 10 minutes, set up an entire Linux Ubuntu VM from scratch on the NAS. Just click, 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 bang, you've got a virtual machine, something you don't have on the QNAP. You've got virtual machine images of Windows betas, not betas, what am I saying, trials, that you can install. You can install a Windows VM in about 4 clicks in about 10 minutes, and then bang, you have a Windows VM on your QNAP ready to go. Something you can't do on the Synology. You have to go and get the ISO and download it and upload it, and it works. It is great, but it's not 5 clicks and a VM, is it? And then on top of that, they've both got their own container applications with Docker, a third-party application running on the Synology, and QNAP having their own container station application. Same goes to things like BoxSafe, Hybrid Mount, just all these apps that have been brought to the table, Virtual JBOD 2. There is just a greater density of business applications on the QNAP. You might not use all of them, but you're likely to find the right one you need from them. Now, surveillance I touched on earlier. You can't access the cameras in QVR Pro via the web browser. You can access it via the mobile phone applications. You can access it via the desktop client applications. But you can't access the cameras as a multi-feed on a web browser. But what you do have is 8 camera licenses. What you do have is a huge amount of control on those client apps. You can even convert old USB webcams into cameras if you so choose. So if you've got 8 camera licenses, if you're a home user, that's a lot to play with. And again, it's not quite as intuitive and not quite as user-friendly as the Synology application, but they both provide excellent control, excellent access to recordings live while still recording, and both have excellent pan-tilt zoom control and more. But the Synology surveillance application is probably the better of the two, but the QNAP is able to do so much more, with facial recognition arriving as an add-on for QVR Pro very soon, and we've tested it on a few devices. It's available in beta, whereas Synology only allow this feature in one of their NAS series. That's their graphics card enabled device, because they want it to run as smooth as anything, completely and utterly on there. And unfortunately, they don't believe it can run on all the other devices without a GPU currently. Whereas a QNAP are allowing you to experiment, allowing you to test these things out, and also see what works for you. And again, if that sounds experimental, if it seems a bit sketchy, then I don't think you're going to like the QNAP platform. And that's what it is about the intended end user on these devices. Now, there are other things that you have to factor in. For example, 3 years of manufacturer's warranty on the Synology device and only 2 years on the QNAP. They can both be extended, but there's still that difference straight away early on off the bat. The noise and power consumption does seem to be higher. I know we're basing it on spec sheets on the QNAP overall, which may be a downer to a number of you. But of course, there is more going on the QNAP in terms of ports and connections, which you kind of have to factor in. On top of that, between the two of them, I would say that if you're a brand new to NAS and you're only going to use it for simple backups and multimedia streaming, the QNAP's going to seem like massive overkill. The Synology, on the other hand, will give you a lot early doors. But I would also highlight that between the two of them, the glass ceiling seems a lot lower on the Synology than it does on the QNAP in terms of hardware and indeed some of that software. And because of that, we can look at the way in which you're going to be using this device, not just today, not just next week, but in the next years afterwards. And it's worth highlighting that it's the longevity of you and your data that's important here. You're not buying this for 1 year, you're buying it for 5 or 10, and therefore you want to make sure you make the right purchase early on for the future. Now, if you're buying it for a Plex Media server, I'm pleased to say both of these are going to pretty much perform exactly the same level. Neither one of them is going to give you 4K transcoding in Plex Media server. You can wipe that straight off the table. You could be able to watch some 4K on this in Plex, but transcoding, forget it. 1080p transcoding in Plex, to a degree, it will work, but both of these utilize a CPU that is less proficient with H.265 than its predecessor at 8 and 10-bit in encoding and decoding, so that might be a factor. So make sure you double check your multimedia collection and what media types you're running. But apart from that, between these two, it is about ease and simplicity and evolution and viability between these two. And I think the end user, you, can make the choice between them based on what I talked about today. But otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Do let me know which one is one that appeals to you the most based on everything you've heard. Click like if you've enjoyed this video. Click subscribe to learn more. And of course, visit Span if you want to buy your NAS. NAS experts, 25 years in the biz, worldwide shipping, technical expertise at your fingertips, free pre and post sales tech support, and they're a one phone call away. Come on, it's easy. Or visit me at nascompares.com for the full written breakdown of this comparison in the link below. And I'll see you next time.